Live with another episode of the Parmjeet and Pradeep Show. Parmjeet, how you doing today?
Pradeep, I'm doing reasonably okay, I would say. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I'm having a great day so far. Things are going well. So let's jump right into it. We have an interesting topic today. I think it's something that a lot of people are talking about, have been talking about for a number of years now, but it seems to be really on a high trend when it comes to diversity, inclusion, discrimination. What are your thoughts on that? Our topic today is reducing discrimination. And I think as a Punjabi population, I think we experience discrimination in a lot of ways, but also we may have a tendency to discriminate as well. So, what are your thoughts?
I think I have quite a bit of thoughts about this whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion thing because though it tends to approach this area, but so far what we know is that we must be just swimming in circles. That it's wonderful to have those initiatives, and I personally know of a lot of corporate houses have now diversity, equity, and inclusive initiatives. People go for diversity trainings. People go for what we call implicit bias training. There's a huge slew of activities people have to do in order to get to speed of what diversity means for them and how to diversify their workforce. But there's another side to that because it seems like so far all these efforts may not be that successful as we would have wanted it to. And partly is because the way we think about diversity and equity and inclusion is not exactly how it pans out in real life.
Mhm.
Because there's a self-interest, there is our own hidden biases, there's our between discrimination, we do discrimination between populations, we also do discrimination within ourselves. Means I can speak to, I think we both of us can speak to what the discrimination within Punjabi community and towards each other. Sometimes it on the basis of skin tone. Um, Tera rang bada kala, teri kala, either rang bada kala. Why? What sort of these kind of things
Mhm.
that's common. We often don't think this is a discrimination. Uh, we often uh, have a tendency to evaluate people with the fair skins uh, with what favorability than we would do with the dark skinned.
Mhm.
It's a strange that uh, people of our uh, country, they are more likely to be dark because of a very single gene, so it has nothing to do with other things. But we often have a huge tendency, especially in Punjabi culture, and I can tell you that this is a huge tendency that if your wife is dark skinned, or they are okay with the husband being dark skinned, because I think they have taken that kind of a exported or imported view of tall, handsome, dark boy. They're okay with that. But I often wonder they are not okay with the intelligent, dark, and humorous woman. I'm not sure why they would actually do that. But it's interesting that our Punjabi community does it all the time. I have people personally have known women who would discriminate other women just because they are slightly dark skinned,
Mhm.
or conversely speaking, they would favor other women just because they're lighter skin. That's, if you think about, that can have a huge implication in the way the family dynamic work. So if you are, especially in the modern world, if your other half is dark skinned, you you are already
Yeah.
packed into that kind of a corner, and the rest everything follows from that. Means nobody is care how intelligent you are, how talented you are, or she is. So that's something within our community happens. But going back to our basic question, that does all these efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion work? I think the answer can be is somewhere in between. It's neither yes nor no, complete, because I think the efforts are wonderful, but mostly it's just like swimming in the shallows. We give impression we are doing something useful, but really not.
Yeah, really good points there because within our in our community, as I mentioned before, we feel discriminated against a lot of times, and I think um, maybe every person out there has in some way, shape, or form, whether that's based on your color or maybe it's based on your education or something else. But especially in Punjabis, I want to share an example here. It was really interesting. One of my cousins, he ended up falling in love with a Gori, and his mother was very much against it to the point where she was just saying, "No, I'm not even going to go to the wedding because of this." And she was very religious as well, right? Amrit Chakyasi. So she wanted someone of the culture, same religion. And which ended up happening though, when my cousin actually got married to her, the Gori actually started to learn Punjabi, was very family oriented, and basically became the best mother-in-law that my aunt could have. And it was a complete flip for her. It was something that she was totally against before, based on, you can say, traditional discrimination, but the other way, the reverse discrimination against someone light skinned. She finally came around, and it was actually a nice. I use that story all the time because if she can get past that challenge, I always say anybody can. And so, and it really came down to what you were talking about, and I think what we were talking about before the show in terms of how do we reduce discrimination. It's application. She didn't know that her daughter-in-law was going to be so great until she actually became her daughter-in-law, until she actually started to interact with her.
It's interesting to make that observation. I think it may be fair to say that it's not that Punjabis and Indians like uh, fair skin, because if that would be true, then they will like every Gori or Gora, or they will be okay their
Yep.
kids marrying those individuals. I think they like the color, but they want that color to be on the skin of their own kids
Hmm.
or the kids they are going to marry. So one thing we it's interesting to note that it's not that people like fair skin. It's just they like the fair skin on their own, so that they can continue to have the what we call the best side of the both worlds.
Hmm.
And going back to that point means I have a lot of stories where individuals will tell that okay, somebody is dark skinned, somebody is not dark skinned. um, I am dark skinned, my wife is dark skinned. Actually, I was told by one of my cousins when we were about to get married that maybe I should find somebody else.
Oh.
so it's funny because this is what our culture is. Because but more than that, the often thing I interest is that why our people are so obsessed with white color or fair skin. What does it? To me, that's more interesting question, because what does fair mean to them, which attracts to them? Uh, and that can be, in fact, a lot more. It can decrease a lot of problems in our society,
Hmm.
because I tend to think that there's a lot of domestic abuse happens because of these small things.
Interesting. Now, you came across an interesting study as well, right? When it comes to diversity, and I think maybe you can sum up what you got out of it.
Yeah, it was. I was reading something, and suddenly this study jumped up, and which said that we are why all the racial diversity efforts are failing. And study was published in Science Advances last year, and it was titled "Racial Attention Deficit," that the way we don't pay attention to the people of different colors. So it was very interesting study. What they wanted, they came up with the kind of experiment in which they wanted to have a middle-aged white working male to talk about if they want to solve a problem. And the way they thought about it is that they split. They said that okay, you have to evaluate this part, and then half of it was given fictitiously. Half of those uh, data points were given what we call white sounding names, other half were given black sounding names. And what they found was that all those individuals, the middle aged white uh, sounding names or individuals, they have a tendency to pick the solutions offered by individuals who also were white. So there was almost like 33% more likely to pick solutions offered by the white sounding names than black sounding name, even if the expertise level was better or less or more. That didn't matter. So that was interesting to them, that why do those individuals thought that the white sounding names are going to come up with a better solution, or their solutions are better than the black sounding names. So they wanted to see if they can actually reduce this, which has a huge application to in the work environment. And they did two modification. One modification was that they were told before the experiment began that all these people you are going to see the solutions from, they are skilled at it, they have done very well in the past, and then they administer the experiment to all those individuals, white sounding, um, middle-aged working men. And they found something interesting, that by telling people that these individuals were skilled, they were able to eliminate what we call the racial disparity. People didn't care about whether somebody is white or black in the terms of assessing whether somebody is skilled or not. But the adoption rate didn't go up. So even though they were able to be okay with the rating that everybody is skilled, the adoption was still leaning toward the white sounding names. Then the second modification they did was, which is actually a huge implication in the terms of the business who are interested in diversifying their workforce and how to create a level playing field. And that was that they had those individuals do the thing or solve a problem before those individuals, before the group was given the experiment. So it seems like you're sitting in a room and the other people are solving that issue in front of you. And then after they have solved the issue, you are given your task and then you go ahead and do your experiment. And what they did is that by doing that, both racial disparity and adoption rates got eliminated. So there was no difference between whether somebody was black or white.
Hmm.
So that it has a huge implication the way we can move forward in the terms of diversity and reduce discrimination. And one of the way the authors suggest is that maybe all those individuals coming from like black sounding names or minority communities, they should be given recognition and their work and skill level needs to be publicly recognized.
Hmm.
And if it is publicly recognized, that's more likely to reduce the bias against minority communities. Because oftenly, and I have personally felt that, in past when I went to Australia as a postdoc, I always felt that people thought I was less skilled, even though I had more education than them.
Hmm.
And I felt both here too, many times. Many times they will actually tell me later on that we were surprised. And I said, why would you be surprised? Means I have all these kind of work experience. But that is a kind of assumption most of the people would make. So this is actually the takeaway from this study is that if we want to reduce discrimination at workplace, especially in the business structures where there's a lot of emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the ways, a very evidence-based way, is to publicly recognize the skill and the contribution of the individuals of minorities. That will automatically reduce discrimination.
Hmm. So do you think, like, for example, when we're on LinkedIn, and which was predominantly a Caucasian platform before, now you're seeing a lot more Sikh posts or posts from Sikh individuals of the accomplishments. Do you think that's having a difference in terms of how um, Punjabis and Sikhs are being seen in the workplace?
It should. Technically speaking, yes, but it can also have a blowback because remembering that LinkedIn is a kind of a sanitized environment. It works through algorithm.
Hmm.
So it can work in your favor, but it can also work in your disfavor. It all depends upon who clicks on that link, who likes it, who celebrates it, or not, and that will actually, in fact, send a message to the algorithm.
Hmm.
That's one thing. The second thing is that whether that algorithm is designed to recognize that is another thing, because there's a lot of misgiving about the algorithm, the way it operates, because algorithm is not a standalone intelligent feature which kicks in. Algorithm is designed by humans to recognize what needs to be recognized.
Mhm.
So it can have a both sides. To me, I think means having a lot more posts from individuals from Sikh communities or any minority communities can have a positive impact, but it can also create a negative backlash, because
Yeah.
you are in a kind of a environment where the communication is virtual.
Mhm. Yeah, and if we take a look at algorithms, from my understanding, the research that we've done, is that if we take a look at the algorithms of social media, they are not designed to be diverse. It's not about diverse information. It's about what you like, and how much time you're going to spend on it. So if you like a certain topic or a specific post, you're going to get more of the same similar posts. So you become more narrow than actually diverse. I think that's the other challenge when it comes to the algorithms of social media. That's why we see such extremism there. So I thought I'd ask you that question when it comes to LinkedIn, because I'm seeing a lot more Punjabis come on there, seeing a lot more of Indian presence, people from India having a stronger presence on LinkedIn, which is nice to see. I'm just wondering if it's going to have an impact in terms of diversity and maybe stereotypes. But Parmjit, I want to take a look at it from another perspective. I want to flip it around. But sorry, did you have a comment on that first?
No, I wanted to comment quickly on that. Algorithm is always exclusive information. In order for to be made sense with it, always has to exclude, it has to compress itself. So I often do wonder that, is it possible that individuals, we see a lot more Sikhs in LinkedIn, is not because a lot more Sikhs are on the LinkedIn, but because the algorithm picks up our last names and say that, okay, this person may be interested in that. So I often do wonder this, that is this the fact we see a lot more posts from the individuals of our own community is a good thing or bad thing? I cannot make up my mind, but I have a I hunch that it could be a lot more exclusive, that it may in fact exclude you from the other population. So there's a risk that it is actually spider webbing itself, um, because
Yeah.
information is often exclusive, not inclusive.
Yeah, which is exactly, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because if I take a look at it, when I'm seeing a lot of these posts, it's other Punjabi people actually liking those posts. So it or Sikh people liking the post, so it actually makes sense because it's just feeding the system. Um, so I'm going to take a look at it from a different perspective, because I think it's good to see things from both sides, and maybe we don't have enough time to talk about it in this episode, and we can dedicate a specific episode to it. But the concept of I don't want to say inclusive, the opposite of inclusivity or exclusivism or maybe groupthink or whatever it might be, just remaining within your existing preferences is considered a bad thing, but is it really? For example, is there anything really bad about, for example, my aunt wanting her daughter-in-law to be Indian? Is there something bad about that? I take a look at my kids, and they're very fairly young. My son's almost 9, my daughter's almost 7. I would prefer them to be married to someone Punjabi, prefer them to be married to someone Sikh, not because I have anything against anything else, but just because I have a tendency to feel like I want our culture to continue. And maybe it'll be easier for them to be in a relationship with someone of the same culture. Maybe it won't. But I like, so here's my personal thinking. I believe that the way our uniqueness as different cultures is what makes this world unique, is what makes it interesting. So for example, I went to Italy not too long ago, and the Italians have a different culture. And what would happen if that culture was completely westernized, for example, right? If it was so diverse, would it still have that same effect? I don't know if it would. And so within our Indian culture, that's why people say, well, I love Indian food, right? Or I love Chinese food. Or, I love going to Indian weddings because they're so different. Is there something wrong with keeping your heritage, right? I'm not saying excluding anybody, but I'm just saying keeping your heritage. So I tend to think of things from both perspectives because I have a personal preference to say, okay, if you guys get married to Punjabi Sikh people, great. I prefer that. But if not, it's not the end of the world. You can't really control who you fall in love with at the end of the day. I'm not going to say no, you can't, but there's a preference there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The fact of the matter is that as humans, we are social creatures and we gravitate toward people we find comfort with. So uh, I don't think there's anything wrong. I often think in the terms of the whole idea of diversity is diversity allows us to create things which may not be present in the group, but whenever we create things, we break the old things. So if all Italians and Indians and Spanish have to disappear and assimilate and become a one single motley crowd of what we call culture, then the uniqueness, the fabric will change itself. So I do often, I 100% agree with that, that there's a there's other side to this whole idea of diversity. Um, because the whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is not as much as related, at least from my point of view, it's not as much as related uh, to that question you have asked. It's related to increasing productivity and performance, and robustifying yourself against setbacks.
Hmm.
Because diverse systems are always a lot more robust
Hmm. Hmm.
than homogeneous systems.
Yep. I
And
agree with you. I was just going to jump in and say something there because, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because within, even let's just say within a cultural standpoint, a marriage or family unit, if we are just, because us as Punjabis, we have a certain thinking, right? And we have certain norms and traditions, but it's nice if we have someone thinking differently, someone that challenges us, right? My dad used to laugh. He used to, uh, when he was around, he would be like, you know what, just marry a Gori because you're gonna have a lot less headaches. With Punjabi women, you end up getting all these other headaches. And I used to laugh, but there's pros and cons to everything. So I like what you're saying there because you're right, because diversity does allow for adaptability. It allows for new thinking. That's how, we've evolved as human beings. So, final thought for our listeners out there, because we've talked a lot about diversity and people are, we're not going to stop people from being discriminated against, or discriminate others. But what are your thoughts in terms of closing this episode out?
so I think the last thing I would say, uh, in the context we have talked, so there's a many contexts in that. There was a subcontext to this conversation, which appeared more like in a comedic way.
Hmm.
We're talking about individuals, dark skinned or light skinned or fair, lovely kind of things. But from a very professional standpoint, I think one thing, because our community is now heavily professionalized,
Hmm.
the thing I would like them to take away from this conversation is that whenever we are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, instead of going through the checklist of all the things you often do, maybe the emphasis could be that all the individuals who participate into any establishment, could those individuals be recognized so that everybody knows the skill level of those individuals? And I will close this conversation by quoting a real life example. One of my friends has recently moved from Australia and he works in healthcare. And he was having, because he is new here, he has having some kind of a issues with all the employment agencies. So, and his employment agencies was telling him that he is not skilled, um, because the way he saw him. But then he took all the awards he got in Australia, and suddenly their behavior has changed. And I think now this actually follows that when people who are newer to the country, they're often thought they are not that skilled. But now, because he has certificates to show, he was telling me this yesterday that now their behavior is pretty much opposite. They want him to work for them, and they told him that we didn't know that that you are so skilled. So I think that is where when things become public, you're more likely to actually advance the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion rather than talking about it or
Mhm.
just singing praises why it is. That's one thing I would leave the audience with.
Yeah, great points there. It's actually now that you talked about that, I'm just gonna throw out a couple of things here because it reminded me of from a business standpoint, one of the best practices that I've seen in business, and not very many organizations do this, is that they actually present or they actually have a place, a visual board where it shows each individual on the team and their skill set. So, for example, it's an inventory of the individual skill set knowledge. So, let's just say there's Department A, there's 10 people in there. What is each person proficient in, whether it's Excel, Word, any other program, technical software, and it's actually put up there in the department. So when people come in, for example, or a teammate is looking for help, they can actually go there and say, this person actually has this experience or this knowledge that I need help with. And they have the ability to go there. So that is, it actually puts everything out there visually so people understand that. Not only that, but when other managers are walking through that department, they can also see who in the other department actually a skill set. So if it comes to higher advancements or transfers or um, you know, going and proactively trying to promote people, it's actually all there visually. It was a really interesting practice that I saw, and it's actually worked out very well for those organizations. Now, a lot of people would say, I don't want my inefficiencies or my lack of skills to be presented on there, but I think it's an interesting practice. We've implemented in a few of the organizations that we've worked with, not on a grand scale, but at a divisional scale, and it's had good results so far. Western this practice comes from the Eastern culture, more Asian culture, and the Western culture is a little bit still apprehensive about it. But I thought that was a good practice because it goes to what you're saying is dis- displaying people's skills set, acknowledging skill set helps eliminate that discrimination. So that was just something that popped into my mind there.
No, absolutely. And if I may quickly add, that in fact would be a similar experiment we just talked about. You know that when you put those skill set on the blackboard or whiteboard, you're eliminating those attention, what we call racial attention deficit, because business's primary aim of any business is to protect and maintain, sustain, and enhance their bottom line.
Hmm.
And having skillful employees and being and using those skillful employees to enhance their bottom line would be in their favor. So I'm not surprised why would it work.
Hmm.
Uh, but this would be very different if you're actually using it in a social context.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So great insight there, Parmjit. I personally appreciated it. This topic of discrimination, diversity, inclusion. I think we could talk about this forever. I'm sure we're going to have some more episodes. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you, the audience out there. Thank you for listening in. Please subscribe, share with your network if you're getting value from this, and we hope you are. And if you have any feedback, feel free to reach out. So hope you have a great day.
Ditto. Thank you, Pradeep, and thank you, folks. We'll see you again.
Take care.